In the fractured landscape of modern America, few voices were as loud, as influential, or as utterly polarizing as Charlie Kirk. The nation, already teetering on the edge of ideological conflict, found itself captivated by a man who seemed to embody the very spirit of its culture wars. Charlie Kirk, at just 31 years old, had built a conservative media empire from the ground up, commanding the attention of millions and the ear of a former president. His rise was meteoric, his presence impossible to ignore. He was a hero to his followers, a champion of what he called traditional American values, and a fearless warrior against the progressive tide he saw engulfing the nation. His rallies drew thousands, mostly young men, eager to be part of a movement that promised to restore what they believed had been lost. To his detractors he was a dangerous demagogue, a purveyor of hate speech and a threat to the very fabric of a diverse and tolerant society. His words, broadcast across countless platforms, ignited fierce debates and sometimes even violence. Whichever side you were on, his impact was undeniable. He was a lightning rod, drawing both adulation and condemnation in equal measure. Now that powerful voice has been brutally and permanently silenced. The assassination of Charlie Kirk at the University of Utah has sent a shockwave across the United States, and indeed the world. A single shot from a sniper's rifle brought a sudden violent end to a life lived at the heart of America's culture wars. The scene was chaotic, security scrambling, supporters in disbelief, the nation glued to their screens. The event has done more than just end a career. It has ripped open the country's deepest wounds, exposing the raw and bitter divisions that Kirk himself so often inflamed. This was not merely the death of a man, it was a political earthquake. The aftershocks were immediate: panic, outrage, and a desperate search for answers. The assassination has instantly become a defining moment for a generation, drawing chilling parallels to the political violence that scarred previous eras of American history. People are already comparing it to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, a moment that forever altered the nation's psyche. The sense of loss, confusion, and fear is palpable. As authorities launch a desperate manhunt for the shooter, the country holds its breath, teetering on the edge of a new and terrifying chapter. The streets are tense, the air thick with suspicion and anxiety. The questions are immediate and overwhelming. Who pulled the trigger, and more importantly, why? Was this the act of a lone, deranged individual, or something far more sinister? The story of Charlie Kirk is the story of modern America itself. It is a tale of ambition, media savvy, and the potent force of populist anger. It's about how a young man from the Chicago suburbs, who eschewed a traditional college education, rose to become one of the most significant figures in the American right. Understanding his journey is essential to understanding the forces that led to his tragic end. His life was a testament to the power of new media and the relentless drive to reshape a nation's political destiny. His death now serves as a grim warning of where that path can ultimately lead. This documentary will unravel the mystery behind the assassination of Charlie Kirk, exploring not only the events of that fateful day, but the turbulent forces that shaped his rise and his fall. In the chapters ahead, we will delve into the world that made Charlie Kirk, the enemies he made, and the legacy he left behind. The answers may be elusive, but the questions are more urgent than ever. This is not just the story of a man, but of a nation at a crossroads, where words can become weapons, and where the battle for America's soul is fought not only in the halls of power, but in the hearts and minds of its people. The assassination of Charlie Kirk is a warning, a tragedy, and a mystery, and it is only the beginning. Join us as we unravel the threads of this shocking event, seeking not only to understand what happened, but why it matters, now more than ever. The world is watching. The story is far from over. This is the assassination of Charlie Kirk, an event that will echo through history, and a mystery that demands answers. Charlie Kirk's story does not begin in the hallowed halls of Washington, D.C., or the boardrooms of New York City. Instead, it begins in the relatively quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. where Charlie Kirk was born in 1993. Raised in a comfortable middle-class environment, Kirk's early years were marked by stability and opportunity. His father, a successful architect, instilled in him a strong work ethic and a sense of discipline. The Kirk household was one where spirited debates about current events and history were common, and young Charlie quickly developed a taste for argument and analysis. Yet even as a child, Kirk felt a profound disconnect with the mainstream educational and cultural institutions around him. He often found himself questioning the narratives presented in his classrooms, feeling that something essential was missing from the lessons. By his early teens, Kirk was already gravitating toward conservative thinkers. He devoured books by free market economists and watched hours of political commentary online, often staying up late to follow the latest debates. He recalls in interviews how a single op-ed about the national debt sparked his curiosity and led him down a rabbit hole of research and self-education. This was not a young man destined for a quiet life. Kirk's friends remember him as the one who would challenge teachers in class, not out of disrespect, but out of a genuine desire to understand and debate the issues. His political awakening was rapid and decisive. At a time when most of his peers were preoccupied with sports or video games, Kirk was attending local political events, asking pointed questions, and networking with community leaders. While his classmates focused on college applications and weekend parties, Kirk was consuming conservative literature and political commentary. He often found himself alone at gatherings, preferring the company of books and online forums to the typical suburban social scene. He was particularly frustrated by what he perceived as a pervasive liberal bias in academia. In high school, he would challenge teachers on economic and historical points, sometimes earning the ire of administrators, but also the respect of those who valued open debate. After graduating, Kirk briefly attended Harper College, a community college near his home. There he found the environment even more stifling, with what he saw as a lack of intellectual diversity and a culture that discouraged dissent. He believed universities were no longer places of open debate, but rather factories of left-wing indoctrination. He would later recount how a single classroom discussion about American history, in which alternative viewpoints were dismissed, solidified his conviction that something had to change. It was then that Kirk made a fateful choice. He would leave college behind and dedicate himself entirely to the cause of conservative activism. He packed up his books, left his student apartment, and set out on a path that few his age would dare to tread. It was a gamble that would change his life and American politics forever. The decision was not made lightly. Kirk spent many sleepless nights weighing the risks, but his conviction never wavered. At the tender age of 18, when most are just beginning to find their way, Kirk was already laying the groundwork for a revolution. He worked late into the night, drafting manifestos and reaching out to potential allies. In 2012, fueled by a passion that bordered on obsession, he co-founded Turning Point USA. The organization began as a modest operation, with Kirk and a handful of like-minded young men strategizing in coffee shops and basements. His mission was clear and audacious: to build a nationwide network of young conservative activists on college and high school campuses. Fighting back against the progressive establishment, he traveled from campus to campus, often sleeping on couches, recruiting students who felt similarly alienated. Kirk possessed a natural talent for public speaking and a populist rhetoric that was sharp, direct, and incredibly effective at mobilizing a youth audience that felt ignored and alienated by the mainstream. His speeches were peppered with anecdotes from his own life, making his message relatable and authentic. He was a new kind of political operator, one who understood both the mechanics of grassroots organizing and the nuances of digital communication. Kirk's ability to strategize, adapt, and connect with others set him apart from his contemporaries. He wasn't a seasoned politician or a stuffy academic. He was a young, energetic firebrand who spoke the language of his generation. His casual style and direct approach made him a relatable figure for many young men searching for a voice in the political wilderness. Kirk understood the power of social media, the importance of a strong brand, and the appeal of a simple, powerful message. He leveraged every platform available, from Twitter to YouTube, to spread his ideas and rally supporters. He argued that conservative values, free markets, limited government, and traditional faith were not relics of the past, but the keys to a prosperous future. He often cited the examples of self-made men and the importance of personal responsibility as guiding principles. This message, delivered with his signature confidence and zeal, began to resonate deeply with a growing number of young people across the country. Kirk's rise from the quiet suburbs of Chicago to the national stage was not just a personal journey. It was the beginning of a movement that would reshape the landscape of American youth politics. Turning Point USA began as a spark, an idea fueled by Charlie Kirk's relentless drive and a vision to reshape the political landscape for young conservatives. In the early 2010s, Kirk, then a recent high school graduate, recognized a void. Conservative students felt isolated and voiceless on college campuses dominated by progressive ideologies. In 2012, alongside his co-founder Bill Montgomery, Kirk set out to build an organization that would empower these students. Their first strategy was simple but effective: connect with like-minded young men across the country, one campus at a time. The early days were marked by long hours, minimal resources, and a shoestring budget. Kirk and his small team relied on grassroots fundraising, collecting small donations, organizing phone banks, and personally reaching out to potential supporters. Kirk himself crisscrossed the nation, often driving from campus to campus, speaking to small groups of students, handing out flyers, and building relationships with young men eager for a platform. His message was unwavering. The American university system had been overtaken by leftist ideology, and it was time for conservative students to organize, speak out, and reclaim their place in the national conversation. The response was electric. What started as a handful of campus chapters quickly multiplied as word spread and more young men joined the cause. The organization's growth was nothing short of explosive. Turning Point USA evolved from a small activist group into a multi-million-dollar powerhouse, hosting massive conferences and rallies that drew thousands of young conservatives from across the country. Kirk's talent for fundraising and networking was unmatched. He forged partnerships, secured sponsorships, and built a brand that resonated with young men seeking a sense of purpose and belonging. The movement's aesthetic was bold and unmistakable. Slick marketing, high-energy events, and a roster of charismatic male speakers who inspired and energized the crowd. Events like America Fest became legendary, drawing tens of thousands of young conservatives. These gatherings blended political speeches with music and entertainment, making the movement feel fresh, modern, and exciting for a new generation of men. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the branding to the programming, ensuring that each event left a lasting impact on attendees and solidified their commitment to the cause. Kirk's ambitions didn't stop at campus activism. He envisioned a broader movement that would influence every level of American society. He expanded Turning Point into a sprawling media and political empire, launching new initiatives and leveraging digital platforms to reach millions. Turning Point Action was born, an aggressive electoral arm focused on mobilizing young male voters for Republican candidates, organizing rallies, and driving turnout in key elections. Recognizing the importance of faith in the conservative movement, Kirk launched Turning Point Faith, recruiting pastors and faith leaders to become community organizers and bridge the gap between politics and the church. Most recently, Kirk announced Turning Point Academy, an ambitious project to create an alternative K-12 school system rooted in a pro-American curriculum, directly challenging the public education system he so often criticized. Through every expansion, Kirk remained the face and driving force of the movement, embodying its values and vision. His personal brand became inseparable from the organization. with his image and message at the forefront of every campaign and event. The Charlie Kirk Show, his daily podcast, consistently ranked among the most popular on Apple Podcasts, delivering unfiltered commentary and mobilizing a massive audience of young men. With nearly 5 million followers on X and 7 million on TikTok, Kirk established a direct line to Generation Z men, a demographic that had long eluded the Republican Party. Kirk wasn't just influencing the conversation, he was shaping it, solidifying his status as a dominant force in American political life and inspiring a new generation of young men to take action. The meteoric rise of Donald Trump in 2016 was the catalyst that propelled Charlie Kirk from a prominent youth activist into the upper echelons of American political power. Kirk, already known for his sharp rhetoric and organizational prowess, immediately recognized Trump's outsider appeal and disruptive energy as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reshape the conservative movement. Kirk was among the very first to throw his support behind Trump's unconventional candidacy, championing his message at a time when many in the Republican establishment remained skeptical or outright hostile. He saw in Trump a kindred spirit, an outsider unafraid to challenge the status quo, break political taboos, and confront entrenched interests head-on. This mutual recognition forged a powerful alliance. Kirk mobilized the full force of his rapidly expanding Turning Point USA network, deploying student volunteers across the country and saturating social media with pro-Trump content. His efforts were instrumental in energizing a new generation of conservative activists. The partnership between Kirk and Trump quickly became one of mutual benefit and trust. Kirk's unwavering loyalty did not go unnoticed. Trump welcomed him into his inner circle, granting him unprecedented access to the White House and key decision-makers. Over the course of Trump's presidency, Kirk reportedly visited the White House more than 100 times, becoming a familiar and influential presence in the corridors of power. He emerged as a trusted, informal advisor, uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between Trump's administration and the youth vote, a demographic critical to the movement's long-term success. National publications, including The Atlantic, dubbed Kirk the new kingmaker of the American right, second only to Trump himself in terms of influence within the conservative movement. Kirk, in turn, elevated Trump to near-messianic status, often describing him as a providential leader destined to restore America's greatness and moral foundation. For Kirk, the political struggle was more than a contest of policies. It was a spiritual battle for the very soul of the nation, with Trump as the standard-bearer. Kirk's influence was evident in numerous key decisions, from campaign strategy to policy priorities, as he leveraged his access to shape the direction of the Trump movement. In the 2024 campaign, Kirk played a pivotal role, using his vast media reach to energize the base, counter opposition narratives, and keep the movement's momentum alive. Kirk was widely credited with persuading Trump to select J.D. Vance as his running mate, a strategic move that solidified the ticket's appeal to the populist, nationalist wing of the party and reinforced Kirk's reputation as a behind-the-scenes power broker. Kirk's endorsement became a political force in its own right, with his ability to mobilize supporters making him an indispensable ally to Trump and the broader conservative movement. He was not merely a passenger on the MAGA wave. He was actively steering its course, shaping its message, and guiding its direction from behind the scenes. This symbiotic relationship defined the latter half of Kirk's career, intertwining his fate with Trump's and amplifying his influence across the conservative landscape. Kirk leveraged his proximity to Trump to expand his own brand and organization, while Trump relied on Kirk to maintain a vital connection with a younger, more dynamic base of supporters. Kirk's books, including and became intellectual blueprints for the Trump movement, advocating for a sweeping conservative transformation of American institutions and values. This powerful alliance made Kirk a dominant figure within Republican circles, but it also painted a target on his back for those who opposed the Trump agenda, intensifying the political animosity and controversy that would ultimately surround him. Charlie Kirk did not shy away from controversy, he embraced it. From the very beginning of his public career, Kirk seemed to thrive on the friction his words and actions generated. He understood that in the age of social media and 24-hour news cycles, outrage could be a powerful tool for building a brand, and he wielded it with precision. Kirk built his reputation on a foundation of provocative statements and an unwavering refusal to moderate his positions. He saw this as a sign of strength and conviction, and his supporters admired his willingness to say what others would not. But this approach also made him a lightning rod for criticism, and his every word was scrutinized by both allies and adversaries. On the issue of race, Kirk was relentlessly combative. He frequently inserted himself into campus debates, challenging the prevailing narratives on systemic racism and social justice. His confrontational style often led to chaotic scenes at universities, with heated exchanges between students, faculty, and outside activists. He labeled the Black Lives Matter movement as a form of domestic terrorism and accused it of fueling a race war in America. These statements sparked outrage, leading to protests, counter-protests, and even threats of violence at events where he was scheduled to speak. Kirk made national headlines for questioning the competence of black pilots, a statement that was widely condemned as racist and inflammatory. He was a fierce opponent of all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, which he condemned as anti-white and discriminatory. The backlash was swift. Universities distanced themselves, sponsors pulled funding, and civil rights organizations called for his deplatforming. He also openly promoted the so-called Great Replacement theory, an idea that non-white populations are being brought in to replace white voters. This theory, long associated with far-right extremism, drew condemnation from mainstream political figures and watchdog groups who accused Kirk of stoking racial paranoia and legitimizing hate. Kirk's views on gun rights were just as absolute. He was a fixture at gun rights rallies, where he delivered fiery speeches about the sanctity of the Second Amendment. He argued that the freedom to bear arms was paramount even if it came at a cost. As a staunch defender of the Second Amendment, Kirk insisted that any attempt at gun control was an unacceptable infringement on constitutional rights. He maintained that the right to self-defense was non-negotiable, and that the government had no authority to restrict it. In one of his most infamous statements, Kirk suggested that a certain number of gun deaths were a justifiable price to pay for that freedom, drawing a shocking comparison to the inevitability of traffic fatalities. This remark was replayed endlessly on news programs and became a rallying cry for both his critics and his supporters. This position horrified his critics, who saw it as a callous disregard for human life. Gun control advocates organized protests and demanded apologies, while Kirk's base doubled down, viewing any concession as a slippery slope toward government tyranny. It was a stance he held until his very last moments, never wavering in the face of mounting opposition. His refusal to back down became a defining feature of his public persona. Kirk's commentary on social issues also generated intense backlash. He frequently argued for a return to traditional values, insisting that the erosion of these principles was at the root of America's decline. His critics accused him of being out of touch and reactionary, while his supporters praised his commitment to what they saw as timeless truths. He was a hardliner on abortion, opposing exceptions even in horrific cases such as child rape, arguing for the absolute sanctity of life from conception. This uncompromising stance drew fierce criticism from pro-choice advocates and civil liberties groups who accused him of lacking compassion and ignoring the complexities of real-life situations. Kirk waded into deeply troubled waters, with comments suggesting that incidents of rape involving alcohol consumption fell into a grey area. These remarks were widely condemned as victim blaming, sparking outrage on campuses and in the media. University officials were forced to respond, and student groups organized demonstrations demanding accountability. Furthermore, he often promoted a traditionalist view of gender roles, suggesting that the family unit and traditional responsibilities were the cornerstone of a stable society. This perspective was met with resistance from those advocating for more progressive social norms, leading to heated debates in the media and at public events. Internationally, Kirk's positions were equally uncompromising. He was unafraid to take sides in global conflicts, often aligning himself with the most hardline elements. He was a fervent supporter of Israel and denied the existence of a Palestinian state, referring to the occupied territories by their biblical names, Judea and Samaria. This position won him praise from pro-Israel groups, but drew condemnation from human rights organizations and critics of Israeli policy. Kirk dismissed reports of famine in Gaza as Hamas propaganda and controversially justified the killing of children by arguing they were being used as human shields. These statements were met with outrage from humanitarian groups and international observers who accused him of dehumanizing an entire population. He viewed Islam as fundamentally incompatible with modern Western civilization and expressed alarm over the presence of Islamic centers in America. His rhetoric fueled debates about religious freedom, national security, and the limits of tolerance in a pluralistic society. These statements, delivered with his characteristic bluntness, made him a global figure of controversy. The consequences were far-reaching. He earned powerful enemies and allies alike, and his words reverberated far beyond America's borders, shaping debates and dividing communities around the world. For Kirk, controversy was not a byproduct, it was the point. The morning of the assassination began as any other for Charlie Kirk. He arrived at the University of Utah just after 9 a.m., accompanied by his security detail and a small group of student organizers. The campus was bustling, the air crisp, and the mood, at least on the surface, was routine. By 10 a.m., Kirk was inside the main auditorium, reviewing his notes and greeting supporters. Security teams swept the venue, checking exits, scanning rooftops, and coordinating with campus police. Outside, a crowd began to gather, supporters waving banners, protesters assembling with signs, and curious onlookers mingling in the quad. At 10:30 a.m., the doors opened. Attendees filed in, filling the seats. Kirk's team monitored the crowd, noting the presence of several vocal protesters but no immediate threats. The atmosphere was tense but controlled. By 11 a.m., the auditorium was at capacity. Kirk took the stage to thunderous applause from his supporters and a chorus of boos from his detractors. The event began with a prepared speech, followed by a heated debate segment. The crowd's energy was palpable. Security maintained a visible presence, scanning the aisles and monitoring entrances. Kirk, unfazed, thrived in the charged environment, fielding pointed questions and delivering sharp retorts. At 11:45 a.m., the event transitioned to a Quanda session. Kirk stood at the edge of the stage, microphone in hand, engaging directly with the audience. The questions grew more contentious, but Kirk remained composed, responding with his trademark confidence. At 11:57 a.m., a student stood to ask about gun rights, a topic Kirk was intimately familiar with. He launched into his well-rehearsed defense of the Second Amendment, emphasizing the importance of self-defense and individual liberty. As Kirk spoke, security personnel scanned the crowd and the upper balconies, alert but not alarmed. The event had been peaceful so far, with only minor disruptions. At precisely 12:01 p.m., as Kirk gestured to emphasize a point, a single sharp crack rang out. The sound echoed through the auditorium, momentarily confusing the audience and security alike. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Kirk paused mid-sentence, his expression shifting from focus to shock. Then, chaos erupted. Kirk collapsed to the stage, blood pooling beneath him from a wound at his neck. The audience erupted in panic. Some dove for cover, others rushed toward the exits. Security immediately moved to shield Kirk and assess the threat. Within seconds, the auditorium was a scene of pandemonium. Security teams called for backup and campus police initiated lockdown procedures. Emergency medical personnel rushed to the stage, applying pressure to Kirk's wound and attempting resuscitation. The severity of the injury was immediately apparent. Meanwhile, students and attendees continued to flee, some in tears, others in shock, as law enforcement swept the building for the shooter. At 12:05 p.m., paramedics arrived and began advanced life support. Kirk was quickly loaded onto a stretcher and rushed to a waiting ambulance. Investigators later determined the shot had come from a concealed position in a nearby building, approximately 200 meters from the auditorium. The sniper had used a high-powered rifle, firing through a partially open window. Forensic teams swept the suspected sniper's nest, recovering a single spent casing and traces of gun oil. No fingerprints, no personal effects, only a cold, calculated setup. At 12:18 p.m., Kirk arrived at the hospital. Despite the efforts of trauma surgeons, the wound was fatal. He was pronounced dead at 12:34 p.m. News of his death spread rapidly. By 1 p.m., a memorial had already begun to form outside the hospital, with supporters lighting candles and leaving messages. The immediate aftermath at the university was one of disbelief and horror. Witnesses, many in shock, recounted the event to police and media, their accounts painting a picture of confusion and terror. The assassination had been live-streamed to thousands, the footage quickly circulating online. Social media exploded with speculation, grief, and outrage. By 2 p.m., the news dominated every major outlet. Hashtags trended worldwide, and public figures issued statements of shock and condemnation. Law enforcement launched a massive manhunt. SWAT teams swept the campus and surrounding buildings, but the assassin had vanished, leaving behind only a meticulously planned crime scene. The investigation intensified over the next hours. Surveillance footage was pored over, witness statements collected, and forensic evidence analyzed. Yet, by nightfall, no suspect had been identified and no motive confirmed. Ballistics experts traced the bullet's trajectory, confirming the sniper's vantage point. Investigators theorized the assassin had scouted the location days in advance, exploiting a gap in security protocols. Detectives interviewed dozens of witnesses, including security staff and event organizers. Every detail was scrutinized, from the timing of the shot to the layout of the auditorium. Forensic teams combed the sniper's perch for DNA, fibers, or any trace evidence. The assassin had left nothing behind, suggesting a high level of training and preparation. By the end of the day, the University of Utah remained under lockdown. Law enforcement maintained a heavy presence, and the search for the shooter continued into the night. Across the nation, the assassination of Charlie Kirk sent shockwaves through political and academic circles. Theories abounded, but answers remained elusive. As night fell, vigils were held on campuses and in cities across the country. Supporters mourned the loss of a prominent voice, while investigators worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery behind the attack. The University of Utah would never be the same. The events of that day left a scar on the campus and a nation grappling with the chilling reality of political violence. The assassination of Charlie Kirk was no longer a hypothetical fear. It was a brutal, calculated act that left the country searching for answers and justice. The news of Charlie Kirk's assassination sent shockwaves through the United States, plunging the nation into a state of profound disbelief and turmoil. From bustling city centres to quiet rural towns, the collective reaction was one of stunned silence, quickly giving way to a torrent of emotion and debate. The story dominated every news channel, every social media feed, and every conversation. Newsrooms scrambled to provide updates, while anchors and correspondents struggled to process the enormity of the event in real time. Across the country, there was an outpouring of grief and outrage from Kirk's millions of followers and conservative allies. Many gathered in public spaces, holding flags and signs, their faces etched with sorrow and anger. For his supporters, Kirk was a fallen patriot, a martyr for their cause, silenced for speaking what they believed to be the truth. Vigils sprang up in cities and towns, with mourners lighting candles and offering prayers in his memory. Prominent Republican figures led these gatherings, calling for swift and decisive justice. Their speeches were fiery, urging unity among supporters and vowing that Kirk's legacy would not be forgotten. The political rhetoric quickly intensified. Many on the right immediately blamed the radical left and the mainstream media, accusing them of fostering a climate of hatred that, in their view, led directly to this act of violence. On the other side of the political spectrum, the reaction was more complex and fraught. While mainstream liberal leaders and commentators universally condemned the assassination, their statements often included references to Kirk's divisive rhetoric and controversial positions. Many expressed horror at the act itself, but struggled to eulogize a man they considered a purveyor of bigotry and misinformation. Their public statements were measured, careful not to inflame tensions further. The awkwardness of these responses was palpable. Expressions of sympathy from the left were often met with suspicion by the right, who accused their opponents of hypocrisy or even quiet satisfaction at Kirk's demise. The result was a tense and polarized public discourse, with accusations and recriminations flying across the airwaves and online platforms. The chasm between the two Americas had never seemed wider or more impossible to bridge. In the streets, protest groups faced off, their anger and frustration boiling over. The symbolic image of a fractured nation was impossible to ignore. The shockwaves extended far beyond America's borders. International media outlets broke into regular programming to cover the story, and foreign governments watched with growing alarm. World leaders issued statements of condolence, expressing solidarity with the United States and voicing concern for the stability of American democracy. Many saw the assassination as a symptom of deepening political instability in a nation long viewed as a model of democratic governance. Allies reaffirmed their commitment to the United States, but their words were tinged with anxiety about the future. The world watched, uncertain whether America could weather this storm without descending further into chaos. For many around the globe, the United States had always been a beacon of stable democratic transition. Now the assassination suggested a nation spiraling into a new and dangerous era of violent extremism. The event was not just an American tragedy, it was a global warning. Governments everywhere began reassessing their own security protocols, fearing the spread of political violence. In the digital world, the reaction was even more volatile. Social media platforms became battlegrounds for competing narratives, with every faction seeking to control the story. Conspiracy theories flourished, with different groups pointing fingers and making baseless accusations. The online environment grew increasingly toxic as misinformation spread at lightning speed. Kirk's supporters shared clips of his speeches, vowing to carry on his legacy. His detractors circulated his most controversial statements, fueling bitter and often vicious online clashes. The raw emotion of the moment, amplified by the algorithms of social media, threatened to spill over into real-world conflict. Police and security officials braced for unrest, monitoring online chatter for signs of coordinated action. The assassination had silenced Charlie Kirk, but it had unleashed a cacophony of anger, suspicion, and division that threatened to tear the country apart. The nation and the world stood at a crossroads, uncertain what the next chapter would bring. In the aftermath, the United States faced not only the loss of a prominent figure, but a reckoning with its own divisions, broadcast for all the world to see. Amid the torrent of domestic and international reactions, one statement stood out for its unusual nature and its powerful source. The world watched as leaders and commentators struggled to process the magnitude of what had occurred, but it was a single eulogy that would echo far beyond the immediate aftermath. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a figure not typically known for eulogizing American media personalities, issued a remarkably personal and forceful statement. His words, delivered with a gravity that transcended diplomatic protocol, captured the attention of the world. Initially, He posted a simple message on social media: "Pray for Charlie Kirk." The brevity of the post belied the depth of feeling behind it, and it quickly spread across platforms, drawing responses from political figures, commentators, and ordinary citizens alike. But as the news of Kirk's death was confirmed, this was followed by a formal, uncharacteristically emotional eulogy. The statement, released through official channels, was more than a diplomatic gesture. It was a reflection on a life that had, in Netanyahu's words, altered the course of the ideological struggle in the West. This was not a standard diplomatic platitude. It was a profound expression of loss from the leader of a foreign nation for a non-governmental figure. Netanyahu spoke not only as a statesman, but as someone who had witnessed Kirk's influence firsthand. In his eulogy, Netanyahu called Kirk a brave friend of Israel and a titan in the defense of Judeo-Christian civilization. He described Kirk as a man of conviction, whose voice had rallied countless supporters to the cause of freedom and security. Charlie Kirk, Netanyahu declared, stood as a bulwark against the rising tide of extremism. He was a steadfast ally, a man whose loyalty to the truth was unwavering and whose courage inspired those who believe in the enduring partnership between our nations. He praised Kirk's unwavering support for the Jewish state and his fight against what they both saw as common enemies. Netanyahu recounted moments when Kirk had spoken out, often at great personal risk, to defend Israel on the world stage and to challenge narratives that threatened the alliance between the two countries. Most strikingly, the Prime Minister revealed that he had spoken with Kirk on the phone just 2 weeks before the assassination. Their conversation, he said, was marked by a shared sense of urgency and purpose as they discussed the challenges facing their respective nations and the broader Western world. During that call, Netanyahu had personally invited Kirk to visit Israel, a testament to the high regard in which he was held. The invitation was more than ceremonial. It was an acknowledgement of Kirk's role as a bridge between two peoples, and as a trusted voice in the ongoing dialogue about security, faith, and freedom. This revelation underscored the deep and direct connections Kirk had cultivated with powerful figures, not just in Washington, but on the global stage. The statement was extraordinary, not only for its candor, but for the way it illuminated Kirk's reach and influence. It is highly unusual for a world leader of Netanyahu's stature to issue such a specific and heartfelt tribute for an influencer and activist. The eulogy was dissected by analysts and commentators who noted its rare tone and the implications it carried for the perception of Kirk's legacy. It signaled that Kirk was seen within the highest echelons of the Israeli government not merely as a friendly media voice, but as a crucial strategic ally in the ideological battles being fought in the West. Netanyahu's words suggested that Kirk's advocacy had tangible effects on policy, public opinion, and the broader struggle for the values both men championed. Netanyahu's words positioned Kirk as a fallen soldier in a global culture war, a defender of shared values against the forces of radicalism. The Prime Minister spoke of Kirk's unyielding spirit, his clarity of vision, and his willingness to stand in the breach when others faltered. He likened Kirk's passing to the loss of a warrior on the front lines of a battle for civilization itself. For Kirk's supporters, it was a powerful validation of his importance and his mission. The eulogy was read aloud at vigils and memorials and shared widely across social media, where it became a rallying point for those who saw Kirk as a champion of their cause. However, this unexpected eulogy also ignited a firestorm of speculation and conspiracy theories, particularly among those critical of both Kirk and Netanyahu. The depth of the tribute and the revelation of their close relationship became fodder for endless debate and suspicion. In the fevered atmosphere following the assassination, the Prime Minister's unusually close relationship with Kirk became a focal point of suspicion. Analysts pored over every word of the eulogy, searching for hidden meanings and possible implications. Some corners of American public opinion began to question the nature of this alliance, with some even floating baseless and inflammatory accusations about potential Israeli involvement. The eulogy, intended as a tribute, became a lightning rod for controversy. While utterly unsubstantiated, these whispers highlighted the deep mistrust and paranoia that had taken root, where even a message of condolence from an ally could be twisted and viewed through a lens of suspicion, further muddying the waters of an already tragic event. Yet, for many, Netanyahu's eulogy would remain a testament to the enduring impact of Charlie Kirk, a man whose legacy, for better or worse, had become inseparable from the ideological battles of his time. The question of whether Charlie Kirk should be remembered as a hero or a villain is one that will echo through the halls of history for decades to come. His life, actions, and rhetoric have left an indelible mark on the American political landscape, and the debate over his legacy is as complex and contentious as the man himself. There will be no easy consensus, no single, agreed-upon historical judgment. Instead, his memory will be shaped by the passions, fears, and hopes of those who lived through his era. For millions of Americans, Charlie Kirk stands as a visionary and a patriot. Supporters point to his meteoric rise from a young activist to a national figure, arguing that he embodied the spirit of resistance against what they saw as an overreaching liberal establishment. They see him as a modern David, fearlessly confronting the Goliath of mainstream media and entrenched political elites. To these supporters, Kirk is a martyr, tragically struck down in his prime. They believe he was a courageous truth-teller who gave voice to the frustrations and anxieties of a generation that felt ignored and belittled by the cultural mainstream. In their eyes, he was the architect of a vital youth movement that reignited the conservative cause, a kingmaker who helped propel Donald Trump to power, and a brilliant communicator who fought to preserve the soul of America. They cite his ability to mobilize young men, energize grassroots activism, and articulate a vision of national renewal rooted in tradition and strength. Yet, to his detractors, Kirk's legacy is far darker. Critics argue that his rise was built on division, that he was a master manipulator who exploited social tensions for personal and political gain. They remember him as a political arsonist, someone who profited from stoking the flames of resentment, anger, and fear. They point to his speeches and social media posts, which they claim were designed to inflame rather than inform, to divide rather than unite. Detractors cite his inflammatory rhetoric as a corrosive force that poisoned public discourse and normalized hate. They argue that his words emboldened extremists and contributed to a climate of suspicion and hostility. In this view, Kirk was not a patriot but a demagogue who weakened American democracy by attacking its core institutions, from universities to the electoral process itself. They accuse him of undermining trust in the very foundations of civic life. Critics argue that the violence surrounding his death was not an aberration, but the logical conclusion of the confrontational and often incendiary rhetoric he championed. They see his assassination as a symptom of the deep sickness in the American body politic, a sickness he both diagnosed and, in their view, exacerbated. Ultimately, Charlie Kirk was a perfect reflection of the polarized age in which he lived. His life and death have become a mirror for the nation's deepest divisions. He was a lightning rod, a figure who attracted and amplified the intense energies of a divided nation. His presence on the national stage was impossible to ignore, and his influence undeniable. Supporters praise his genius for tapping into a powerful undercurrent of grievance and channeling it into a formidable political force. They argue that he gave a voice to those who felt left behind by rapid social change, and that he inspired a new generation to engage in the political process. He understood, perhaps better than anyone of his generation, that in the modern media landscape, outrage is a currency and confrontation is a strategy. His mastery of social media and the 24-hour news cycle allowed him to shape narratives and set the terms of debate. He built his empire not by seeking consensus, but by sharpening the lines of conflict, forcing people to choose a side. This approach, while effective in mobilizing supporters, also deepened the nation's divisions. Why was he so influential and so divisive? The answer lies in the fundamental questions he raised about American identity, belonging, and the future of the nation. Kirk spoke directly to the anxieties of a changing America. He asked whether the nation would remain rooted in its traditional values or embrace a new, more pluralistic identity. He framed the debate as a choice between a traditional Christian-rooted nation and a multicultural, secular and progressive one. This framing resonated deeply with some while alienating others. He didn't just participate in the culture war, he was one of its primary generals. His speeches, writings and media appearances were battlegrounds in a larger struggle over the nation's soul. His assassination has robbed his followers of their leader, but it has not ended that war. If anything, it has intensified the sense of crisis and urgency among his supporters. The aftermath of his death has only escalated the conflict, with both sides digging in deeper, convinced of the righteousness of their cause. Charlie Kirk's legacy, therefore, is not one of policies or legislation, but of a deepened and perhaps now irreconcilable divide. He leaves behind a nation more angry, more suspicious, and more fractured than ever before. Whether he is ultimately remembered as a hero who fought for his beliefs, or a villain who tore the country apart, will depend on who writes the history and which America emerges from the conflict he helped ignite. As the nation reeled from the shocking assassination at the University of Utah, law enforcement agencies launched one of the most high-profile investigations in recent history. Within minutes of the shooting, campus security and local police had secured the scene, cordoning off a wide perimeter as a flood of first responders arrived. The FBI quickly assumed control, coordinating with state and local authorities to manage the complex and rapidly evolving situation. Forensic teams worked methodically through the night, gathering crucial evidence from the lecture hall and surrounding areas. Every shell casing, every footprint, every scrap of fabric was catalogued and analyzed. Surveillance footage from university cameras was collected and reviewed frame by frame, offering investigators their first glimpses of the assailants' movements before and after the attack. Ballistics experts traced the trajectory of the fatal shot, pinpointing the location from which it was fired. The murder weapon, a modified handgun discarded near an emergency exit, was dusted for fingerprints and subjected to DNA analysis in state-of-the-art labs. Investigators searched for any trace evidence, hair, fibers or skin cells that could tie the weapon to a suspect. Digital forensics played a critical role. The victim's phone and laptop were seized, as were the electronic devices of those in attendance. Messages, emails, and social media posts from the hours leading up to the event were scrutinized as authorities looked for threats, warnings, or signs of a coordinated plot. The university's Wi-Fi logs and access card data were cross-referenced to reconstruct the movements of everyone in the building. Law enforcement's swift response was matched by a surge of public speculation. News networks broadcast live updates, while online forums exploded with theories, some credible, others wild and conspiratorial. Was the assassin a lone actor, motivated by personal grievance or political ideology? Or was this the work of a shadowy network intent on silencing a divisive voice? The lack of immediate answers only fueled the frenzy. Authorities held daily press briefings, revealing incremental findings but withholding key details to protect the integrity of the investigation. Sketches of a masked suspect circulated widely, and tip lines were inundated with calls. In the days that followed, several persons of interest were detained and questioned. Some were quickly cleared, while others remained under intense scrutiny as investigators pieced together timelines and motives. The investigation became a national obsession, a mirror reflecting the country's deep anxieties and suspicions. Every new lead, every official statement was dissected by pundits and armchair detectives alike. Yet, amid the noise, the painstaking work of forensic science and law enforcement continued, driven by the singular goal of uncovering the truth behind one of the most consequential crimes of the era. As the case unfolded, it became clear that the search for answers would be as contentious and polarizing as the man whose life had been taken. In the end, the investigation was not just a quest for justice, it was a test of the nation's ability to confront its own divisions and demand accountability in the face of tragedy. The assassination at the University of Utah sent shockwaves far beyond the crime scene, reverberating through the corridors of power in Washington and across state capitals nationwide. In the days following the tragedy, political leaders scrambled to respond, each faction seeking to shape the narrative and seize the moment. Within hours, lawmakers convened emergency sessions. The ruling party, once divided over strategy, closed ranks, framing the assassination as an attack on free speech and political engagement. Their rivals, meanwhile, condemned the violence but warned against turning grief into political ammunition. The rhetoric on both sides grew sharper, debates more heated, as the nation watched live. Legislative responses came swiftly. Proposals to tighten campus security and bolster protections for public figures dominated the docket. Some pushed for sweeping surveillance measures, arguing that technological vigilance was the only way to prevent future tragedies. Others called for restraint, warning that reactionary laws could erode civil liberties and deepen mistrust in government. At the same time, the tragedy sparked fierce public policy debates. Gun control advocates renewed their calls for stricter regulations, pointing to the modified weapon used in the attack. Their opponents countered, insisting that the focus should remain on mental health and the failure of existing security protocols. The debate spilled into town halls, talk radio, and state legislatures, dividing communities and igniting protests. Meanwhile, party dynamics shifted in real time. Rising stars vied for the spotlight, positioning themselves as voices of reason or champions of the fallen leader's legacy. Old alliances fractured as blame was assigned and loyalties tested. The party of the slain Firebrand, once fractured by internal disputes, found new unity in the wake of loss, at least for the moment. As the investigation pressed forward, the political aftershocks showed no sign of fading. Every new revelation was passed for its implications, every legislative proposal viewed through the lens of partisan advantage. The assassination, intended or not, had become a catalyst for a new era of political realignment and public reckoning. In the end, the nation's leaders faced a daunting question. Would this tragedy drive them further apart, or force them to confront the divisions that had brought them to this moment? The answer, it seemed, would shape the country's future as surely as the investigation itself. As the halls of power reeled from the aftermath, another battle erupted on a different front. The world of media. Within minutes of the assassination, news outlets broke into regular programming, racing to deliver updates. Cable networks rolled out wall-to-wall coverage, each vying for exclusive footage and expert commentary. Some anchors focused on the shocking details and timeline, while others zeroed in on the political implications, shaping the story to fit their editorial slant. In print and online, headlines ranged from measured analysis to sensational speculation. Certain outlets cast the slain Firebrand as a martyr for free speech, while others scrutinized his polarizing legacy, questioning the rhetoric that had inflamed the national mood. The contrast was stark. What was considered fact on one channel was questioned as conjecture on another. Social media platforms became both amplifiers and accelerators. Within hours, hashtags trended worldwide and video clips from the scene went viral. Some posts offered raw, unfiltered eyewitness accounts, while others spread unverified rumors at lightning speed. Misinformation proliferated, conspiracy theories, doctored images, and false claims about motives flooded timelines, often outpacing official statements. Influencers and commentators eager to shape the narrative weighed in with hot takes and emotional appeals. The digital echo chamber intensified divisions as communities clustered around familiar voices and tuned out dissent. Fact-checkers worked overtime, but the sheer volume of content made it nearly impossible to keep up. Major networks convened panels of analysts, law enforcement veterans, and political strategists. Heated debates unfolded on live TV and radio, dissecting not just the event, but the media's own role in fueling outrage and confusion. In the days that followed, the line between news and opinion blurred as outlets scrambled to capture audience attention in a crowded, volatile marketplace. Through it all, the public struggled to separate truth from rumor, narrative from news. The assassination was no longer just a national tragedy. It was a media spectacle refracted through countless lenses, each shaping public perception in ways both subtle and profound. The question lingered. In an era of instant information and viral outrage, could the nation ever truly know what happened and why? As the media storm raged, the psychological aftershocks of the assassination rippled through every corner of the nation. For Kirk's staunchest supporters, the event was an unthinkable blow. In exclusive interviews, followers described feelings of disbelief, anger, and a profound sense of loss. Some gathered in hushed vigils, clutching banners and memorabilia, their faces etched with grief. "It's like losing a compass," one supporter confessed, his voice trembling. "He gave us direction. Now we're drifting." Meanwhile, detractors confronted a different set of emotions. Relief mingled uneasily with guilt and anxiety. In community forums, some voiced concerns about what the future might hold. "I never agreed with him, but I never wanted this," admitted a local activist. "Violence only deepens the divide. We're all left wondering, where does it end?" Expert voices added context to these raw reactions. A renowned psychologist explained, "Events like this fracture the collective psyche. For some it triggers trauma and fear, for others a rallying cry or a reckoning. The nation is in mourning, not just for a life lost, but for a sense of stability that feels shattered." Across the country, community leaders convened town halls and discussion groups. Emotions ran high, but so did efforts to foster dialogue. "We must resist the urge to turn inward or lash out," urged a prominent pastor. "Healing begins with conversation, even when it's hard." As dusk settled on cities and towns, the psychological toll remained visible, on faces, in voices, and in the uneasy silence that followed each new headline. The assassination had not just changed the political landscape, it had left a scar on the national soul, one that would take time and empathy to heal. As the immediate shock faded, the question of Charlie Kirk's legacy began to take shape. In the months and years following his assassination, analysts, historians, and political commentators revisited his impact on the American landscape. Across college campuses and in city halls, debates erupted over the true nature of his influence. Kirk's fingerprints were unmistakable on a new generation of political discourse. His unapologetic rhetoric and mastery of social media shifted the battleground from traditional debate stages to viral video clips and trending hashtags. Future leaders, many of whom once rallied behind his banner, adopted his tactics, embracing direct engagement, cultivating loyal followings, and challenging the boundaries of civil discourse. The youth movement Kirk ignited continued to evolve, splintering into factions but remaining a potent force in national politics. New organizations emerged, citing his vision as a foundational blueprint. Rallies, podcasts, and digital campaigns drew on his playbook, keeping his message alive long after his passing. Some called him a trailblazer who gave voice to the unheard. Others argued that his approach deepened divisions and set a precedent for confrontational politics. But regardless of perspective, few denied that Kirk had changed the rules of engagement. In think tanks and classrooms, his speeches and strategies became case studies, lessons in both the power and peril of modern activism. As future leaders stepped onto the stage, echoes of Kirk's style and substance could be heard in their words and seen in their campaigns. Charlie Kirk's legacy, controversial and complex, endures in the fabric of American political life. His story remains a reminder. One voice, for better or worse, can reshape a generation.